Do you feel squeezed for time? I've been talking to a lot of people lately about that very question, and the reason I've been doing that is because my schedule has just seemed to have gotten so packed that I don't have enough time to hardly even think some days. As a matter of fact, this YouTube channel and the articles that I write, used to write on a daily basis, have really taken a back seat to something of a tyrannical schedule that I've had in the last 2 or 3 months. It just seems like there's a demand on my time from an infinite amount of sources. Some of these demands are really good. We've had a lot of company this summer, which we, quite frankly, have really enjoyed. We've been able to enjoy some relationships and renew some important friendships that we've just really enjoyed. And we've got to spend time with our grandchildren. We've got to take part in different projects that we really wanted to take part in. A lot of the things that we have done that has filled our schedule so much are things that certainly have been worthwhile. But having said that, it just seems like it's almost to the point where our schedule is about to explode. And after a while, you start to feel the pressure. I know the people I've been talking to, when they talk about their schedules getting out of hand, I believe them because I look at them and they just look tired. They're exhausted from trying to keep up with the pace. So what's happened? You remember the old wildlife shows that used to be on television? I used to love to watch those when I was younger. One of the ones that I can remember, or a type of one that I can remember, involved a boa constrictor catching its prey. And a boa constrictor, when I was little, I used to think that they would just crush the bones and choke the victim to death, but that's typically not the way they operate. What they do is they wrap themselves around their prey and they just start to squeeze. And after a while, every time that little animal that they have in their coils exhales, they squeeze a little bit tighter. So when the animal tries to get air back into its lungs, it takes in a little bit less than it did on its last breath. And that continues for a while until finally the lungs are essentially completely collapsed. And that little animal, or a big animal sometimes, just can't get its breath, and the boa constrictors claimed another victim. Well, that seems like a good description for what's happening to my schedule and maybe to your schedule as well. Maybe you can relate to this. We just seem to stack on more and more until life is just too full. And there are days we are so busy that we just can't even seem to catch our breath. So what can we do about it? When you think about it, so many of the things that occupy our time are necessary things. They're things that we must do, either because they're just a requirement of our lives or because they're something that decent people do. If you're an adult, it's very likely that you have a job and that you spend a significant amount of time at that job. And with prices rising, it seems like we have to maybe spend a little bit more and more time at our jobs just to try and make enough money to keep up with the increasing cost of everything. Many people have had to get a second job or a side hustle to where they can make a little bit of extra income. And so their schedule just gets a little bit fuller. If you're a kid, it seems like school just gets more and more packed. I don't know exactly why that is, because it doesn't seem like the test scores are doing anything but going down in recent years on a national basis. Hopefully your school has not found that to be a problem where your kids go to, but it is a trend, certainly. So why is it that school is getting more and more packed with time requirements when it seems like very often they're producing an inferior product? Well, You think about our families. A decent parent is going to spend a reasonable amount of time with their family. It's the thing that we do. We love being around our spouses and our kids, and so we take the time that's necessary. As our kids get older, it seems like they get involved with more and more activities, and so we just keep adding another thing to our schedule. It may just be a little bit at a time, but they add up, don't they? And then there comes a point where we are just so packed and we have so many demands on our time that there gets a point where we just want to have some time for relaxation. Maybe you've got a hobby that you really enjoy, but we do need recreation so we can recreate ourselves. And so we have that. But after a while, after you look at all these things, they have gotten to the point where our schedules are just absolutely out of control. And we start losing sleep. And very often when we do go to bed, it takes a while to get to sleep because we're so keyed up from all the things we've been doing. What's the solution? Do you remember when you were younger, a child in your parents' house? Hopefully you had good parents. I did. If my parents wanted me to do some kind of a chore, they expected me to get it done. And sometimes these chores would seem a little overwhelming to me, and sometimes I would just make them a little overwhelming by the way I approached them. Yeah, I might have been expected to carry the groceries in from the car, and instead of taking a number of small loads, I'd try and just grab everything at once and try and struggle in with that one load. I might call upon my parents and ask them to help me, that it was too much for me, and if they saw what I was doing, they would probably be real quick to say, you just need to take a smaller load. And sure enough, that which seemed impossible to do all at once, if you split it into smaller tasks, it became more than manageable. But now there were other areas where I just had bitten off too much to chew, or they had given me too big of a project, and in such a case, they were more than willing to help me. Because they knew, being older than I was, what a reasonable burden was and what an unreasonable burden was. And so the reasonable ones, they expected me to handle on my own. They preferred that I'd figure it out on my own, but if I started asking for help for something that really didn't require help, well, they'd make sure that they provided an explanation for a way that I could handle it on my own. But again, the things that were too big, they were willing to help. Well, that's the way God is in our lives. God is the perfect Father. He knows that we have a lot of things to do. When you consider it, this life really is a test. The idea of whether we'll serve God in good times as well as bad. Will we give Him the proper attention even when we're really, really busy that this life requires? There's a great passage in the 90th Psalm. The 90th Psalm, it says that it's by the man Moses. So this is the psalm that's written by Moses. And in verse 9 it says this, all our days pass under your wrath. But then it goes on to say this in verse 10, the length of our days is 70 years or 80 if we have the strength. Yet their span is but sorrow and trouble, for they quickly pass and we fly away. And then this part, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. We need to learn to be able to step back and examine our lives from time to time, to number our days aright. Sometimes we're like a schedule glutton. That's an unusual term, but you know what gluttony is when it comes to food. There are some times in our life where there's something we like so much it just doesn't seem like we can get enough of it, and we just keep on eating it, often to our detriment. But hopefully we've all, through experience, learned that we cannot do that. We cannot continue to eat everything in sight. There has to be a limit. We cannot be a glutton. And so we start taking in portions that are manageable, that are reasonable for us to enjoy and to get by on. Well, we need to learn that in our schedules because, again, I think sometimes we just have no restraint at all when it comes to our schedules. And sometimes it's over things that we don't really want to be doing in the first place, but we just keep adding it in. Somebody has asked us a favor here, somebody has expectations there, and then there are just some things that we see an opportunity and we take it, not thinking about what it's doing to the overall time limitations that we all have. And there does come a point where it's like that straw that broke the camel's back. It may not be that big of a deal, but added to the cumulative load, it can collapse us. And it seems like more and more people are having trouble with that. Maybe it's from the time where everybody was shut indoors and when they started having the opportunity to get out and do things, they just leapt at the chance. And anything that came along, oh yeah, I want to do that. And that was fine when it was manageable, but we keep on with that type of a mentality, and before you know it, we're just taking on everything. We're taking on too much. And eventually we just don't do well at anything because we've got so much going. We do need to step back and number our days aright. We need to figure out what is the most impactful of the things that we can do and leave them in our schedule. But the things that are not absolutely necessary, whether for our living as far as paying the bills, or whether for our interactions with our family and friends that are needed, or whether it's the recreation that we also need to take part in some of. But sometimes we get a little bit too much or a little imbalanced to the point where, again, we feel like we're going to collapse. We feel like we can't even breathe. And we just need to step back and assess our situation with an honest appraisal of our schedule. Are these things really necessary? Am I getting more out of them by doing them, or am I actually decreasing the quality of my life or the effectiveness of my service to God, or the effectiveness of my being a spouse or a parent or an employee or whatever it is? Sometimes we just need to stop and catch our breath and look at where we're at. Think of this example. Imagine a man running a mile relay, and he gets tired really early, but he knows he's got to run a little bit faster than the guy next to him if he's going to win the race. So he keeps on struggling and keeps on struggling, and then finally it dawns on him there's something holding him back. At some point he's got to stop and assess his situation. This man might be dragging an anchor. If that's the case, he's never going to win the race. He's going to have to recognize he's dragging an anchor, and he's going to have to cut that anchor free. Then he can start up again and have a hope of catching up and maybe even finishing the race in such a way as to where he's going to win it. In this life, sometimes we tie ourselves down with all sorts of anchors that are absolutely unnecessary, and they tire us out, they exhaust us, they make us get to the point where we're not even enjoying our lives. We do need to stop and assess where we're at. We need to pray to God for wisdom. I'm absolutely convinced that we need to have a proper relationship with God. So many times when people's schedules get out of hand, that's the first thing that suffers. Maybe they're worshiping twice on Sunday, and they go to Wednesday night Bible class or prayer meeting, and they just get to thinking, this is too much, this is what's wrong with my schedule. And so they start cutting back, and they cut back more and more to the point where they're just going to the worship occasionally. Or maybe they're praying less, or maybe they're studying less. And while there are times that necessarily will require that we ease back a little bit, we need to watch ourselves that we don't harm our relationship with God just because of a busy schedule. We need to be praying to God and asking Him for help. He's like the good parent, isn't He? As a matter of fact, He's the perfect Father. When we ask Him for help, He's able to see whether we're struggling with a load that's too much for us. In that case, I believe He's going to help us. But if we're just struggling with a load because we're trying to do it all at once, I imagine He's going to expect us to figure out to break it down into more manageable tasks and to bear the rightful burden alone. Again, He'll help us. I don't mean that He's not going to, that we're all alone. I believe He'll help us in every aspect of life, but He doesn't want us to be spiritual welfare recipients. He'll help those who have a true need, but for those who can help themselves in areas that are reasonable for them to help themselves in, I think God expects us to do that. And so don't be loading your schedule down and cutting Him out and then asking Him for help or blaming Him for what you've done yourself. You need to stop and look. Talk with your spouse if you're married. If you're overburdened, it's very likely they are too. And I imagine they would appreciate your recognizing that. Talk about together what you can do to make your schedules a little bit more manageable. Don't cut back on the important things with your family, but there's other things that maybe are not as important that maybe you just need to not do. There might be times where instead of that neat 3-day weekend that you'd like to go and do some fun things on, but you find yourself exhausted at the end of those fun things because you've been running in so many different directions, maybe you just need to enjoy some time with the family at home and allow them to do their own thing at times and have some family events at other times. Maybe there are times we just need to catch our breath. And if you're a good worker, your boss will recognize if he's overloaded your schedule. You can talk with them. And for those of you who are the boss, you need to be attentive to the schedules that you have as far as the expectations you have for your own employees. Are they reasonable? Are they dead weight? Or are you impeding them because you're putting too much on them? Good employees are hard to find, so whichever side of the ledger you find yourself on, if you're a good employee, your boss should recognize that. And if you have a good employee, you probably recognize that. So if a schedule is overloaded, a good boss will try to do what they can to help their employee manage that schedule. And if cutbacks are needed in some of the expectations, they'll do that. They don't want to have to train another employee to do something that you already do very well. But make sure you're a good employee and make sure that you're being effective for the time that you are there and not goofing off. Are you overburdened in your life because you have so packed your schedule with things that you can hardly even breathe? If so, welcome to the club. But let's have the intelligence to stop, to assess where we're at, to see if we're dragging any unnecessary anchors, and then after having done that, after cutting loose the unnecessary things, then let us run the race with everything we got. This life's very short, but eternity is by definition forever. Let's make sure that we are numbering our days right. Part of that is to make sure that we're doing the best we can in all areas with all the resources God has given to us, including our time. He's given us all 24 hours a day. You don't have anything less than your neighbor does. And if you've packed your schedule too tightly, then step back and see if there's anything that can be adjusted. I suspect, like me, you'll find out maybe there are some things that can be removed without really affecting the overall quality or effectiveness of your life. God's on our side. He's going to help us. If you have a good family, they're on your side. They're going to help you. As a matter of fact, every relationship that we have that's good, you're going to find people who are more than willing to help you with a burden that you cannot bear on your own. You can cut back on your schedule, but it's going to take some time and it's going to take some thought as well. If we can do that, I believe maybe we'll all get a little bit better sleep. Maybe we'll feel a little bit more rested, and maybe our lives can become a little better to the point where they're actually manageable and actually enjoyable. Something to think about, isn't it? Well, I appreciate your tuning in today. I hope this is something that helps you in your life, but again, thanks for watching today, and I hope we'll see you again next time.